Good morning, noon, evening or night, depending when you're watching this video. My name is Legend and welcome back to World of Tanks and Mirny-13, the conclusion. After 4 years and 3 iterations, we finally got towards the finish of this amazing game mode, which not only was stunning to play, but also unbelievably epic to experience with the story behind it, with all of its mystery and intrigue. In this video I will accumulate everything, from the story to the questions and theories, mostly the ones that I came up with. This will hopefully result in an acceptable end where everything is cleared up now that the fog of Mirny has been seemingly extinguished. So without any further ado, let us begin. The end. Before we start off, I want to briefly share with you how I formatted this video. I will start off with a brief look back at the latest Mirny event, Lost Hope, before segueing into the concluded storyline behind the matter. After that, it's some wrapping up with questions and theories, both from previous videos and some which I have added in this past month. Hopefully I can get satisfying answers for you all, but if I don't or I miss some, please let me know and I might make a final follow-up video for it. Nevertheless, I think I got the bigger picture now, so let's now look at Lost Hope. So Mirny Lost Hope has a lot similar towards the previous Mirny event, just called Hope, that hasn't been changed. And fair enough, why change something that wasn't broken? Only a few details we can see some changes in. The difficulty levels, instead of low, medium, high, we got normal, hard and nightmare. And when I compare the difficulty levels from the different versions, I believe that we see a higher increase in difficulty between those modes this year. For example, the low and high difficulty were closer in range towards the medium than how the normal and nightmare are towards the hard difficulty. This meant that the normal difficulty was easier than the low difficulty from the previous version. You could easily do that just solo unless your team really sucked. Coincidentally, that also meant that the nightmare difficulty was way harder than the previous high difficulty. I actually haven't managed to complete that one because even with a full team we just didn't have enough luck in our shots and just lacked the near perfect focus fire that was needed for it. I have no issue with the higher ranges between difficulties. It makes the nightmare a real challenge compared to the previous high difficulty, but it also had the option that if you couldn't get a good team, you could still relatively easily complete the normal difficulty, which was my strategy to complete the event. The bosses. Now, instead of only facing the Immortal as the final boss, you got 2 additional bosses with slightly better armored layouts, giving you a harder time to deal with. While the Immortal was still present in normal difficulty, within the hard difficulty you faced off against the corrupted M103. Maybe that's the reason why we don't see the Goliath tank anymore. Instead we got the Legio and the double as replacement for that heavy. And in nightmare difficulty we faced off against the literal nightmare incarnation of the Obsidian tank, directly taken from the fearful dreams of none other than Martin Novak, who actually controls that tank. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, let's just keep that for the story. It was interesting to face off against different types of bosses. However, facing against the nightmare tank was far too frustrating. I will show you a short clip here while I was trying to 1v1 it. However, because there was some lag or some delay, I missed so many shots. Too many. And combine that with the angled weak spots at several locations and it led towards my first full-blown rage moment since I started playing World of Tanks again that very week. It was once again too much bullshittery within one battle. Enemies! So alongside 3 bosses we also got 3 new types of enemy. One of them, the Trapper, which was another prime target to focus whenever it appeared because it deployed the death zones, which if you stay in them deals massive damage to your tank. Alongside we also got the Lost and Corrupted, which I combined because they're both basically the same as in the tanks that we are also playing. They symbolize the platoons that didn't make it and were corrupted by the Miriam into enemies. Very interesting additions, also great add-on towards the lore behind Mirny. Speaking of which, no, just kidding, we got something else first to explore. The map, so far as I can recall, the map hasn't undergone many changes throughout the 3 versions of the event. Only some changes in design, but not layout. But I also like to explore the entire map for extra details or maybe Easter eggs before we never see it again.
So, welcome to the Mirny map. What a delightful sight, isn't it? So yeah, let's go through the Mirny map and see what interesting bits we can find. This is the same sign as the Ghost Town map, actually at the same location, also through the south. So with that kind of marking, it's very easy to see, well, this is the south side of Ghost Town, and with a few changes in between. You do have a little bit of some extra buildings or factory works here. You don't have that in a regular Ghost Town. Let's just run clockwise through the map and see what we can find. And first thing that is very apparent is this cluster of dead tanks. It's very interesting. They have all been ammo wrecked by the looks of it, because the turret is gone. I do not really see what types of tanks they are. Those look a bit like German. Yeah, German Panther. Definitely a Panther. Is it all the same? Does look like it. Does looks like they are the same model, copy and paste it over and over, and it's the model of the Panther. However, this is also being worked into one of the reels, where we see this very image with the title Friendly Fire, which tells us of Captain Novak's his first experience in Mirny, but more on that later. And this is presumably just the clustering of tanks that didn't make it, that were destroyed while being in Mirny and slowly corrupted so far, or well, being converted into the corrupted or the lost, and then killed once again, and then just fused with the matter and starts floating. And we see the same thing happening mainly with the terrain itself, that it's just being morphed into, you see all kinds of spires here. So, but the tanks, also the interesting purple glow, which is the glow of Miriam. It's basically, the longer the contact is with Miriam, the more distorted the surroundings become. For the most part, it is this distorted terrain landscape where the ground has just morphed into all kinds of weird structures and protrusions. Interestingly, this is not part of the map, but this is part of the surroundings. It's more for an atmospheric theme. Don't really know what to make of it, however. Is just the remnants of the rift itself. There's also an interesting, just a flag. I don't know the deeper meaning behind this particular tree wrapped into change for some reason. So I think that's more an aesthetic addition. Okay, this part. Whoa, what is this? This is a big chunk of a harbor. Like, how connected were Mirny and Essegir with each other? Because more I've come to think of it, although this version of Ghost Town seemed to be more harbor-like than Essegir. This is always the most interesting part of the map, with the island in the middle of nowhere. where you have to be very careful not to drive off this this platform. Makes you wonder how it actually works, those gravitational anomalies. How it's just set in stone. Also, if there's no gravity, it should be moving due to all kinds of wind currents still present. Although I say that as there is no wind. Oh, look who is there. Just in time to be very much analyzed. Can also do this on tanks.gg. You see this flag can actually... Oh, that... Now this actually is interesting, because the flag cannon can very well be the thing that is used in retaliation of the recon planes that were sent to investigate. So maybe the Immortal wasn't only destroying tanks, but also planes. That's an interesting detail that I haven't thought about earlier. Nothing too interesting. We have an anchor though. But although it's still quite interesting to have an anchor on a tank. I expect that only to be on a dog. So like the most biggest spires are towards the center of Mirny, which is an interesting design choice as well. Because we have some large protrusions in the background as well, but I think these are the biggest ones, if I am correct. It's close, but it's all pointing more or less towards the middle. Most of them points to the middle, which can be like the Miriam trying to get back to Magnus, because they know of it knows that way it can return back to its home. Maybe. Interesting design as always. Collected through these portals or these protrusions, I suppose. Let's see it in action actually. Let's fast forward a bit. Oh, the fuck! It moves? Hold on a moment. Why does it move? Huh? It's giddy. It's giddy on getting Miriam. Like, I think that there can be like scientific explanations for the design choices and why it's here. Does it actually... Wait. Does it show when... Oh! I never knew that. It actually shows you how full the Magnus is. I never knew that. Never paid attention to that. So yeah, let's get to the next phase. See if something changes, except for the general sky. Like, it is interesting to actually think about how the phases work, because it's like different pocket dimensions, or I like to believe that it is something like that. So every pocket dimension that way is an exact replica in Ascension. And that can also be an interesting conclusion. Why is it exactly the same? It's like it's just taken one moment, maybe the moment before it all gets resolved, like on the mirror trying to get back, like distorting the area as much as possible in an attempt to get back. Just on that very last moment, it all gets frozen and it's set into different dimensions because of some weird gravitational pull. Like, gravity has a lot of influence on different things. Like, the higher the gravity, at some points we see that with black holes. Even the gravity is so massive it can literally just bend the light around, and since we perceive everything with the rays of light, in Ascension, gravity can bend reality as we see it. So that's maybe a reason why these our different pocket dimensions are literally the same, which is still a bit special. I think that it would be more realistic if it was a little bit more distorted. Maybe the spires are getting like either bigger or more contorted or have more angles on them. But I also like this. I'm not complaining on the map not being having enough variety. Not at all. I mean, like setting up this as a whole is already a massive feat. Let's just appreciate the fucking the fire and the instant ammo rack that was caused here. Okay, next. Oh shit! I already forgot something. How did I miss that? This massive alpha hedgehog. Seems that even the residents, the new residents of the Miriam-influenced area are not completely safe. Interesting to see that just the general area is just doesn't have like selected enemies. Like if you are getting stuck, no matter who you are, if you are one who are collecting or one who are defending or hunting, doing something, anyone can get stuck. Which I'm actually curious what will happen now that I'm in free camera mode, because I know that the final phase is like in a different map settings. Does the Magnus moving again, jiggling again? Does the free camera mod go towards the new area? I just loved that detail again. Like I never seen that it fills up like that. Oh, quickly before the hedgehogs arrive. Oh, it is still the same area. Then I have said nothing. Okay. I really thought, and the visibility is clear again. I really thought that that was a different part of the map. They really sold that illusion to me. Well, most of the time I was just too focused on the Immortal, because it was a real challenge after all. So, like, we know the original Immortal, and we know this is the hard version, and we know that the Nightmare version is the Nightmare tank of Captain Novak. More on that later as well. Like, it's hard to do these analysis videos when you already know that it's going to come up with later. You don't want to spoil that much. But this tank is also interesting, and I don't think it comes back in the story that much, so I can tell a bit more about it. This is pretty much the Goliath tank, like the corrupted version of the Goliath tank. I like to believe that that's the reason why we don't have Goliath tanks in this game mode anymore, ever since the second iteration, because it was lost. You might say, oh, but there are more Goliath tanks, but what if they are all lost? Like, the Goliath was one of the first bunch of squads, and we do still see like the Centurion, the AMX, which were also present in the first year, but those tanks are faster. Maybe the Goliath, although having better armor, just could not escape quickly enough. But this tank has also got like finer meaning to the whole ordeal, because it was the Goliath tank that actually pulled the original Immortal out into phase 1 or phase 0 even, into the real world where the weak spots were discovered. But maybe it came with a price, and Maybe it had so much Miriam that it was like too far gone. Even though for that mission it succeeded, it like was already helpless. And maybe in the next mission when it was sent back, still with the high amount of Miriam. Now I think they changed the collectors back once again. I know that Hope tempered with the collector of that specific Goliath in order to harness more Miriam. And we see actually 3 collectors up here. That's actually... Do we see more collectors on any other tank? Where the fuck is everybody? I think everybody only has 1 collector, but we see 3 more. 5 collectors strapped onto this thing. So maybe they kept the collectors on there thinking, oh, it worked, it was stable, somewhat, but it wasn't stable. So like Miriam took full control of it because it already had absorbed so much of it, like through the radiation. But yeah, with that, let's get back into the other subjects of the event.
Consumables, so a few changes in consumables as well. We got the previous instant reload consumable split into 2, 1 rate of fire buff for cyclic guns and 1 instant reload for magazine guns. Also a new consumable in the form of invisibility was added, which made you invisible for 15 seconds if you didn't fire your gun, which is double the potential of impunity you get in comparison to the shield consumable. Good additions as well. Nothing more to say about those. Reels and progression. So the ultimate prize for this event was the tier 8 premium medium, the Obsidian, which was quite easily to get if you were committed enough. Even if you couldn't get certain missions, I still was able to get the final 130 keys necessary within due time. With all the missions being relatively easy, I would be able to complete this event with 58 battles in total. But more than a tank, I wanted to uncover the reels, which finally gave us the conclusion to the Mirny operation. And now, finally, we can apply those and get this final story.
After the Second World War, many research and weaponry experiments were conducted throughout the lands of the USSR. One of such experiments led to the discovery of an unknown matter, later called Miriam, as it was found in the city of Mirny-13. After a decade of study, all the matter suddenly became activated by a nuclear explosion at a nearby training facility in Ezegir. This activation caused a series of gravitational anomalies. The civilians of Mirny were evacuated and all roads were cornered off. Military recon squads arrived for further rescue and investigation missions. They discovered a rift that took them to another dimension. Within that dimension, many horrific discoveries were made. Outside, the landscape was distorted, and high levels of radiation, probably from the Miriam matter, was measured. On top of that, there were also encounters with unknown hostile armored vehicles. Even inside the tanks of the recon squads, it wasn't truly safe. Personnel became affected by the Miriam matter after too long of an exposure. This became very apparent with Captain Novak. Captain Martin Novak, a highly skilled tanker, was among the first squads that entered Mirny after the anomaly. However, he was the only one of his squad that returned in a devastating state. He showed symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress disorder and experienced notable psychological distress, which manifested in a lack of contact with others. Only shortly after, bouts of delirium and panic attacks were recorded. Because of that, he underwent more intense medical treatment according to protocol. During this treatment, he came into contact with senior researcher Hope and showed noticeable improvements to his condition after her visits. When communicating with Hope, he was able to hold a conversation and retold the nightmarish details of the anomaly zone operation. Eventually, Martin fully recovered after just 11 days of therapy. He asked to be declared fit to continue service and had a strong desire to return to the combat missions in the anomaly zone. This struck the medical staff as odd, since with the state he exited the zone, it was believed that his conscious or even subconscious would not permit him to return. Despite of that, he was allowed to be readmitted to military service and operation in the anomaly zone because of his vast experience with the operation. Nevertheless, it was still recommended to monitor his medical and psychological state. Meanwhile, after the successful recovery of Martin, Hope became very optimistic about curing other returned personnel afflicted by the Miriam. She studied these personnel further to get a better understanding of the matter. They could all communicate properly with her and explained that something has changed in them, but they can only describe it as hearing whispers, not being able to make out the words. They have trouble focusing, and when alone, they often felt like someone else was around. Personnel that had the most contact with the Miriam substance tipped into delirium and couldn't clearly articulate their thoughts. However, when given a sketchbook and pen, they were all able to draw the same images: rifts, Magnus, and a huge, distorted tank. This tank was one of the hostile vehicles that were encountered which caused the most devastation. The vehicle with the codename the Immortal. During the active fight against the Immortal, more and more hostile vehicles were encountered. After a while, even vehicles that seemed familiar. And when more intelligence was gathered, the horrific discovery was made that those vehicles were the ones of those that didn't return. These vehicles got the codename The Lost and got the secondary attention within the operation after the attempts to defeat the Immortal. Hope is happy that they are alive and describes their state as the same delirium as the personnel back at the headquarters have who had the most contact with Miriam. She is convinced that they can be saved, with the backed up evidence that her voice acted as a stimulant to the personnel who returned from Mirny. Another experiment started using Hope's voice over loudspeakers within the first phase of the anomaly zone to guide the lost to find their way out. Under the lead of recently recovered Captain Novak, the practical application to return the lost personnel started. The lost personnel reacted to Hope's voice and moved towards the loudspeakers. However, with Novak and his squad still present, the lost encircled them. Having a bad feeling about the situation and wanting to avoid to lose his squad once again, Novak made the harsh call to neutralize the threat that the lost were seemingly imposing upon his squad. However, this caused a huge conflict between Hope and Novak after his return from Mirny. Hope can't believe that Novak called the lost a threat because they are people, alive and can still be saved, in which Novak responded coldly, with her not understanding how dangerous the rift is, that it's expanding and that they have to close it, no matter what, even if the lost are standing in their way. As tensions were growing, changes in Captain Novak's mental states were becoming more apparent. During his expeditions, he became increasingly cruel and began to grow a pattern of aggression. Even fellow officers noted his increased tendency to ignore orders and exercise his own judgment, which exposes personnel to unnecessary risks. These changes are concluded to be caused by severe stress and operating in a high-risk area rather than exposure to Miriam. Right before the final encounter with the Immortal, he was removed from participation in expeditions and was undergoing long-term rehabilitation. During this time, even Hope had to take more risks, endangering personnel of the recon squads in order to turn the tide against the Immortal. Eventually she succeeded, and with her findings, the weakness of the Immortal was exposed, and eventually it was destroyed with the rift now closed. After the closure of the rift, much of the military presence along with Colonel Gromov as the leader of the recon operations left Mirny, leaving only a few tank squads along with the research team behind. As the study of the now less hostile environment of Mirny continued, staff members became worried as they realized that everyone that came into contact with Miriam can get influenced by it, thinking that only military personnel was affected because they entered the territory with high risk levels of Miriam radiation, and for them to be safe outside of its territory became a lesser accepted conclusion. It became more like a delusion. Hope became aware that the Miriam also influenced her already to a high degree and took drastic steps. In order to end the influence of Miriam, she dedicated herself to serve its primary request, to be returned to its home. With her knowledge about the material and the Magnus Collector, she disassociated herself from the other personnel by reopening the rift and venturing in alone. Within the reopened anomaly zone, she tried to give orders to the Lost with her voice to return the final amounts of Miriam to the original deposits. However, even though the Lost listened to her voice, they couldn't understand her, leading to her attempts being a most likely failure. Nevertheless, she kept trying, thinking this is the only way to stop it. The military already brushed her off. They didn't want to understand. They only saw Miriam as an enemy and not as the lost entity that accidentally came into our world. If they continued with that mentality, the circle of violence would continue as the Miriam copied the corrupted nature of the military, and armored tanks would be met with more armored tanks. Even Novak couldn't withstand it. In the end, Hope became more and more determined to conclude the conflict before the army would be back to send in more personnel that would either die or would become more of the lost. Back at headquarters, the reopening of the rift was quickly noticed, and a squad under the command of Captain Novak was deployed to the location to handle the emergency, despite still undergoing much needed rehabilitation. He knew that Hope had fled through the rift and was persistently trying to find her. In a speech, he attends to his personnel to reach the lowest phase as quickly as possible, find Hope and liquidate the consequences. In an attempt to deter Novak, Hope recreated a new incarnation of the Immortal, one that she took from the vision of his nightmares that he shared with her. However, Novak, too obsessed with his mission, rejected his fears and charged in without any hope. His obsession overcame his own person once more, since it already happened before, because his first expedition left a far bigger mental scar than first was expected. During that mission, no one knew about Miriam. When the fights began, one by one, he lost contact with his comrades. Martin didn't think about himself, he just wanted to protect his platoon and bring everyone back home. He would charge his enemies, destroying them, and immediately switch to the next, until there was no one left. When the battle ends, the visibility was improved. Martin began inspecting the wrecks, looking for his comrades. Eventually he found them, and by the looks of the impact, he realized that he was the one who destroyed them. After that, he never forgave himself and became obsessed with the idea of stopping the Miriam and closing the rift. But it only made things worse. Instead of becoming one of the lost himself, he became something else. Something worse. Corrupted. The more he fought the Miriam, the faster it turned him. He no longer could hear hope anymore. As his mind deteriorated, he somehow gained control over the new nightmare immortal incarnation and manifested himself upon it. He kept moving forward, without looking back, without sparing anyone, mindless of any losses and casualties. Eventually, the additional tank platoons, led by experienced commanders that were formed to search for the now missing captain, were able to defeat his new nightmare form. And with the Miriam that he was able to accumulate over his rampage, Hope was able to end the crisis and return the commanders back home. In the last act, however, she announced that she would stay behind for the lost. Although she can't bring them home, she hoped to give them comfort. To hear and follow her voice, they might feel better, and she as well, being finally listened to. The true nature of Miriam can never be understood. It's from another world. We only see its reflection. It's like a mirror, neither good nor bad. Wrath, fear, fury. Miriam simply reflects the dark sides of human nature that it encountered. We got back what we gave it, and in the end, it was Novak himself that created the new immortal. With the final amount of Miriam collected, it unleashed an outbreak of unidentified energy in the center of Mirny-13, accompanied by a flash of bright light. It disabled all equipment within a 10-kilometer radius, the flash even visible from distant checkpoints. More squads were sent in to scout the place out. However, according to aerial footage, the city no longer exists. A huge crater, the only thing that was left in its place. Everyone who was still in the perimeter is considered missing, but there are no traces of Miriam activity and no evidence of any new rifts being formed. Now the area has been cornered off in a 40-kilometer radius and under constant surveillance. Amid the chaos after Mirny-13 was liquidated, all significant samples disappeared. Only a few objects from the area that still contain little amounts of the matter were collected. All of those materials related to the events of Mirny-13 are quarantined for further scientific research and must be classified.
So I hope you enjoyed this story. I still have a few other things that I need to make. I still have the whole Kovalev diary investigation that I promised over a year ago to also make into a narrated story. And I might do a final summary narration of the story completed with all the information we got over the past 3 iterations. But with that mysterious story, there are some questions and theories left to discuss and hopefully resolve. So let's first look at some of the theories I brought up in my first Mirny video back in 2021. And the only major theory with question marks that I brought up was if Steel Hunter took place before or after the events of Mirny-13. Because as we all know, Mirny and Azekir are nearby each other, and of course Azekir has been well known as battleground for the Steel Hunter game mode. And after a few years piling up the little bits of evidence we got, and I can confidently conclude that the Mirny event definitely happened after the Steel Hunter events in Azekir. The whole electromagnetic equipment argument that the tanks use, probably developed by Max von Krieger after he participated as von Hoffman in the Steel Hunter event, is too good of an argument to throw this theory away. But the very conclusive bit of evidence has to be that Azagir was already referred to as a training facility before Miriam was even first discovered. No, the state of both Azagir and Mirny was caused by something else. Mirny only stayed alive as a town because of industrial developments around the old deposit and already looked like a desert in the pictures from the first event. There also used to be water there and in Azagir, but it wasn't the gravitational anomaly caused by the reactivation of Mirnium that left those places in a dried up state. Maybe we find out what actually caused it, or otherwise it's your typical climate change argument for that. The following year I had a bit more questions and theories to share. First, the original rift from 1946. I first thought that the rift was referred to an actual physical rift between dimensions that originated in the old deposits, and that is where the Miriam came from. However, that isn't really the case. It's less of a physical rift and more a super physical rift, if you can call it that. One that you don't physically perceive, but with a bright flash it just occurs and you have passed it. It's not necessarily in any position within our third dimension universe. It has a superposition, so it can change location pretty much all the time. Now, we still don't have the information what caused the rift and coincidentally the origin of the Miriam, which is a huge disappointment because it's really an important bit of lore what caused it, and I really thought that it would be implemented with this final iteration. But on the other hand, leaving some mystery keeps the intrigue up and also speculations. I think my original theory on this matter still holds up, that some experiment in Azagir caused this phenomenon to occur inside the oil deposits. But since no results were measured, the experiment got terminated, evidence erased, and maybe only a few higher ups left knowing that the Miriam that was discovered 6 years later might be caused by that very experiment. But let's continue and hope that this is the only question that couldn't be fully resolved within the actual story. Next up is the change in Hope, which was the biggest diversion of expectations that I could imagine, actually turning out to be the good guy after all. Despite some questionable actions, but we got an alignment spectrum for good characters for a reason, and Hope, being a very well developed character in that regard, falls under the chaotic good alignment, using quite the means in order to save the day. On the other hand, Martin Novak being the twist villain, well done. Only a shame that he didn't appear in the previous mini event, otherwise his character might have been developed even better. But then again, we also only saw Hope in 2 out of the 3 Mirny events. Martin actually being present in the first one and staying right into the lawful category, but falls from good to evil, but in a very interesting way. His ambition for the missions turning into a blind obsession that is destructive for everyone. But going back to Hope, I still think the Miriam played a role in her change of character, giving her the willingness to take more risk by increasing the statistics of the Miriam collectors and eventually reopening the rift to be able to return the final amounts of Miriam before a new catastrophe can start. But all in all, her mindset was still noble and turned out to preserve her initial caring and empathetic character. The King Tiger theory, well, it didn't return this year, but I want to quickly change my early remarks of it. Even though I still mostly agree that the King Tiger story doesn't fully make sense. A quick recall towards that: Alexander with the King Tiger tank was the one who collected the video material from the Goliath commander that showed the weak spots of the Immortal and brought it to Hope. However, in the article it was stated that Colonel Gromov asked for additional information about Azagir because of the active King Tiger. But one event was after the Immortal incident and the other one before. So I said it doesn't make chronological sense and we better ignore the article. However, it doesn't need to make chronological sense because in the very first story about Mirny we got some information about a plane that crashed down in the area, that it looked like it was laying there for decades, but it was also the same plane that was currently undergoing repairs and going for the flight later that month, being actually the plane that crashed there and somehow being transported in time. The same logic or illogic can be applied for the King Tiger. After the incident, Alexander might have gone out there again, but this time disappeared. Maybe that is why we don't see him this year anymore. However, after the King Tiger disappeared, it could be transported back in time, just like the plane. This does imply that at some moment there could be two of the same King Tiger present under the control of the military, but probably one might be transported off somewhere else for further investigation. It does raise other questions, unfortunately, but I just wanted to state that not making chronological sense isn't really a good argument to dismiss this theory. The theories about Miriam being able to pull enemies through phases and the Immortal created pocket phases to hide behind after being pulled to most definitely phase 0 for a short moment still holds up strong. So no intentions to make any changes right there. However, when mentioning how the event was going to continue this year was almost completely wrong. No mini Genesis or Exodus, although we did get a sort of Exodus in a sense that it was the last version of the event, but no global outbreak that needed to be contained in multiple maps and no prequel version happening in Azagir. So those were the mostly resolved questions and theories from previous years. So what about this year? Well, a few questions do come to mind, but I do think I got suitable answers for them too. First up, how did Hope's voice had such an impact on the personnel and the lost commanders that were heavily affected by the Miriam? Well, Hope did also get influenced by the Miriam herself, and with her determination, the matter helped her somewhat traverse the hostile environment without getting in danger, because it knew that she was out to help and resolve this crisis. However, how does this hold up against anyone who she affected before she got affected herself? Because we know that she made a big impact on the recovery of Martin Novak after one of the first expeditions. And we see him in the very first Mirny video from World of Tanks on YouTube, Mirny-13 A Survivor Story, after he mostly recovered because of Hope. But that was before the events of Mirny Hope and Mirny Lost Hope. And for the answer, I am going to learn from my mistake that I made with the King Tiger theory and imply that the Miriam also had, besides gravitational anomalies, temporal anomalies. In other words, when she actively got the ability to influence the affected personnel, she not only got that ability for the present moment and the further future, but also for the past. Meaning that in Ascension, she always had the ability because she once came into close contact with the Miriam herself. A bit like a stretched up bootstrap paradox. Not too far-fetched, right? Good. Glad you are keeping up. Another short question that I've come up with is how long the anomaly event actually take. So a short while ago I came into contact with another Mirny video that made me question about the actual timeline of events. Because there's a lot happening in Mirny, but the events of Hope and Lost Hope don't actually have specific dates applied to them, or I cannot find those dates, unlike with the content of the first Mirny event. This can lead to speculation that the Hope and Lost Hope events are playing out in the further future, a year later or even more years later. However, I do believe myself that all of the Mirny events took place within the same year. This will make the October of 1963 a very packed month, with also a few worrying overlap in told events from different sources. But I still believe that with Martin Novak appearing in the very first video, being in the situation where he somewhat recovered from his first experience within the anomaly zone. However, it was because Hope that he was able to hold conversations with others with his recovery, meaning that Hope was there from the beginning. And I find it then more far-fetched that it took them whole years of missions to collect Miriam, with Group 36 that caused the Immortal incident after those few years. That would mean that there is on average only one expedition each month. And with Martin recovered in 11 days and straightly going at it again, would make the Mirny experience a lot inconsequential to the impact it has on his mind. It is simply just too boring and stretched out to have the events spread out over years. Although having it within the same year and consequentially the same month in that regard will give a lot of challenges to make it a sound story. But I might take up that challenge within my video covering all the events in chronological order. The aftermath of the city of Mirny. So quite the difference that we see in the description of the real number 10 and the map Ghost Town. Both of which being the proclaimed leftover that was once the thriving city of Mirny. In the real, it has been described that the city no longer exists, that there is only a huge crater left where it once was. However, even though Ghost Town might have seen better days, the actual city is still present. It's there, and there aren't any huge craters to be found. Now, the explanation for this will be a theory that will spiral pretty much out of control. And since this video is already very long, oh god, nearing an hour of running time already, I will try to be as conclusive as possible and save the craziness that might unfold for another theory video. So, the reason why Ghost Town exists is because it isn't in the future of Mirny, it is in its past. Now hear me out on this one. First, the version of Mirny in the Mirny event has additional building blocks added and was expanding with all kinds of industrial areas. Number 2, the oil that was found might occurred somewhere between 1946 and 1952, in which the once abandoned ghost town got re-inhabited because of the oil industry starting up there. And third, it could very well be that Mirny before it thrived again was, like Azagir, a training ground we actually see in the random battles. However, this can imply that every random battle on every map is a form of proving ground or training ground. But unlike Steel Hunter, which has more advanced tank technology, would partake some bit more in the past, just right after the Second World War, presumably. Meaning that we can fit random battles within the World of Tanks lore, meaning that we have a timeline of the entire game, meaning that I must save the rest for another video, otherwise this will be a 2-hour long video. Then we got the Rosanov tank, or as we know it, the Obsidian, the main reward of this Mirny event. And like with the King Tiger before, being more shoved into the story because it's an in-game reward might lead to once again some plot holes. However, this time the basis of the tank was neatly incorporated, being the distorted version of Martin Novak, his original tank that became the basis for the Nightmare mode Immortal. Unfortunately, we do have some wonky text explaining that the tank was under repair when the search operation began, and also being identical to Martin his own tank. Then the so-called in chronological theory can't even uphold this, since Martin was the one that also went into the area among the first when the search operations began. So the only explanation I have is that there were simply multiple Obsidian tanks present. At least one for Martin and one for another unknown commander. The one of the unknown commander got lost or corrupted within the area of Mirny, after which Martin encountered it and fueled its transformation with his recollection of his nightmare. Another theory could also be that Miriam created this version by itself from Martin directly and later on from the intel it got from Hope, knowing how to create something that should be a nightmarish experience to Martin and maybe scare him away. This does add another cool theory how Miriam is able to copy the fantasies of individuals. Which leads us to the final question: how does Miriam operate? Now we got some explanation in the nature of Miriam reel, or reel number 13. It's been described as a mirror, reflecting everything it observes. With the visions of Martin, it created a Nightmare Immortal. But how does it explain the rest of the actions that the Miriam takes? Because if it is a mirror, why trying to return itself back home? Well, since it has arrived close to Azagir, the training grounds, the first experiences it got was tank combat that we see in Steel Hunter. This is also the reason why the hostile tanks we encounter in Mirny look so much like the post-apocalyptic tanks that we also see in Steel Hunter. But after also experiencing the feelings with the personnel in and behind the tanks, it got scared. Humanity, with all its dark sides, the nature to wage war, the Second World War even still freshly on their minds, the obsession to advance further, being able to crush their enemies, being amongst themselves in fact. And this reached a boiling point when the nuclear explosion occurred. It scared the Miriam so much it distorted reality, the laws of our universe that it had observed, gravity and time. It became all too much for it. It just wanted to go back. It wanted nothing to do with humanity. Because after all, it was humanity that brought it into this universe to begin with. It was humanity that collected and isolated parts of it. It was humanity that attacked it first. And it was humanity that heavily retaliated when itself came into action. Well, quite the horrifying conclusion, but it's a horror themed game mode, so I find it quite fitting that the actual final antagonist of this whole story and the whole reason why this event took place and the Miriam retaliated was just humanity and the many bad parts of it. Just the willingness to do everything to conquer or improve itself. Quite fearful. Before we end the video, I want to make a shout out towards another content creator that, like me, enjoys unfolding the mysteries of Mirny. This most likely Brazilian creator named Mauricio, or as he's called online Mods, or Mochis, has made some superbly great videos telling the story behind Mirny. But where I am telling the story mostly from the best known sources, mainly only the in-game reels, telling it quite on the straightforward and on a high surface level, he goes more into depth, adding a lot more detail both to the storytelling and video edits. So if you want to know even more about Mirny, or want the story completely retold but with even more detail, then I highly suggest checking out his YouTube channel and see the 5-part video about Mirny yourself. I shall leave a link towards his channel in the description. However, for the non-Portuguese speaking amongst us, me included, I still recommend those videos with automatic English subtitles. I mean, this man, this legend, can narrate so clearly that the translation through automatic subtitles is for the most part enough to follow the story. Although if he somehow can add English subtitles manually, it might be even better. But still, it's a great listen and watch, so highly recommend that. And with that, that's the end of this video. Like I said before, I might still upload some more final Mirny related videos, but those are more story based. So hopefully I managed to answer enough questions that were still floating around. But if I don't, or I missed some, do let me know in the comments. And if the oversight was too big for some points, then this might not be the last Mirny theories video after all. And with that, I will see you next time. Laters.